Well, from the first time I read the story the first time to the end of the first draft was about 17 years. When I finally sat down and wrote the first word till the end of the first draft was about 8-9 months, and it took me probably 2.5 years to write a draft that was good enough to send out to people. And my wonderful writer wife Anita eventually just forced the issue. Said, no, don't write another bloody word. Get that script, send it out, and stop faffing around. Well, I mean, historical context is always difficult. I did, I mean, the bibliography to my novel, runs to 30 odd pages. I read hundreds and hundreds of texts, old text, primary sources, original newspapers. The research was just vast to try and get my head around what it was like to be a First Nations person, or a person who wasn't First Nations, who was half First Nations, half white. The whole coastline was full of Russians, Americans, English, First Nations people, Japanese, whaling people, all kinds of mix and match of cultures. And to try and reflect that period, that time, accurately, to try and construct the voices of all those people in all those coming from all these different places. How did they swear? Most of them were working class poor people. They'd swear and curse. How did they all swear and curse? Nobody wrote that anywhere, at the time in the 19th century. So how to reconstruct the voices and how to make it authentic, not just to the truth of the matter, but to the truth of how we as readers in the 21st century would consider something authentic. That's not something writers are often honest about. But all history is the history of the present, partly. So you both have to construct an authentic past, but also one that is intelligible to the readership of the present. And that was extremely complex to try and work out what was right and what was wrong. And I think I probably did it pretty well in places and not so well in others. It's been much discussed, certainly in Canada, in reviews, whether it works or whether it doesn't. So I think that was probably the hardest thing. I think the easiest, not the easiest, but the most satisfying. I've just been asked this for the paperbacks just coming out, and they're doing a kind of readers groups guide in the back of the book, questions for readers groups to ask and questions for me as the author. What was the most challenging, what was the most interesting? So I've been thinking about this, and what is still the most interesting thing about the book for me is how I inhabited the geography of the place I was writing about. British Columbia is mountains, it's forests, it's huge fjords and the Pacific Ocean coming in and great storms and cedar woods and this incredible kind of epic landscape that my novel is set against. When it was going well, there I was in the British Library, with the dense forest around me as I was writing, having to learn all the fronds and the brackens and the different trees and the fauna, what kind of ducks would land on a lake in March in British Columbia, things like this. And as that all comes into you, you begin to inhabit it. And that's why when a writer has begun to write, they can't ever stop. Because the addiction of achieving that moment, of reaching that point, which you don't often, where you are really inhabiting a space, kind of you just sort of open slightly. Your consciousness just expands just a little bit, and it's an addiction like no other. You spend 99% of your life faffing around, filing paperwork and doing this and that, and failing to write well, and waiting to get back to that space somehow.